Story 1. The call that never routed. I still hear the click before the voice. Not a ringtone, not the normal dispatch tone, just that dry little line open sound in my headset like someone had already been there waiting for me. The part that gets me isn't even that it knew my name. It's that it sounded calm. Like I was the one who joined late. Like I was the one interrupting something already in progress. By the time I heard my own voice come back to me through that line, reading the emergency card clipped to my chest a fraction behind my mouth, I understood I wasn't dealing with a system error. I was just the last person in the building slow enough to keep calling it that. My name's Maren Voss, and at the time this happened I was working overnights as a dispatcher in a small emergency communications office in Boise, on the second floor of a county annex off West Fairview Avenue, not far from the river. I was 29, living alone, taking every night shift I could because I needed the differential pay and because my supervisor knew I was solid under pressure. The office itself was just one main room with a glassed-in entry, 6 workstations, and a narrow break nook with a microwave that always smelled faintly like burnt soup. Overnight it was usually just me. That never bothered me. Professionally alone is still alone, but it feels different when your whole job is structure. Calls come in, you verify, you route, you log, you follow the card if something unusual happens. Everything has a place. Everything has a code. That night was in early December, just after midnight rolling into 1 in the morning, and the building had settled into that dead, mechanical quiet I actually liked. The stale coffee beside me had gone oily on top. The radio rack gave off that constant heated dust smell old electronics get when they've been running too long. The low hum from the equipment was steady enough that you stop hearing it after a while, like highway noise. I had my laminated emergency protocol card clipped to my ID on my chest, same as always. My shift had started at 11. I had already cleared a couple of minor medical calls, a welfare check, and one very patient drunk guy who wanted the police to locate his missing snow shovel. By then things were slowing down, which was normal. After 1, we usually had long stretches where the loudest thing in the room was the ventilation clicking on. The first wrong thing was small enough that I almost appreciated it for breaking the monotony. A call appeared on my console without a source number. No ANI, no location ping, no route information, just an active line indicator on screen 4 and a blank where the origin should have been. That does happen once in a while. Not often, but enough that you don't jump straight to haunted switchboard or whatever people want to call it after the fact. We had old hardware layered over newer software. Boise upgraded in pieces. Interfaces get temperamental. I remember leaning forward and tapping the edge of the monitor with one nail like that was somehow useful and saying out loud to nobody, "All right, what are you doing?" The line was already active, but silent. Not truly silent. There was a soft carrier hiss, and underneath it something like fabric moving against plastic. I didn't answer right away because procedure on a malformed route is to verify the line status first. I checked the adjacent log panel. Nothing. No matching call record at all. That was unusual, but still technical. Still explainable. I toggled the manual refresh. The indicator stayed red. Then I heard a voice in my headset say, very clearly, "Maren, you started at 11:03 tonight." I hadn't hit accept. For a second I thought maybe one of the deputies was pulling a stupid internal prank through radio patch, because they knew I hated that. But the voice wasn't joking. It was flat, almost gentle, not old, not young, not distorted exactly, but wrong in the way recorded voices get when they're a little too close to the microphone. Wet around the edges. I hit disconnect immediately. That was automatic. My hand just did it. The line dropped off the screen. I checked internal test routing, maintenance notes, system health. Nothing. I checked the building extension list. No outgoing internal bridge. My pulse had picked up some, but not enough to matter. I told myself what I'd tell a trainee. Malformed route. Unauthorized audio injection. Possible bleed from another channel. Annoying, but not mysterious. I even touched the protocol card clipped to my ID like that grounded me. There were steps for bomb threats, hostage calls, line failure, external interference, system outage. There was always a box to put a thing in. That's the point. I took a sip of coffee, made a face because it had gone bitter and metallic, and logged a note to report a potential switch anomaly to morning technical. Then the same line came back, already active before the alert finished sounding. I stared at it for one beat longer than I should have. The blank source field, the red active indicator, no log entry. I hit manual reject instead of answer. It stayed live. I disconnected from the software console entirely, closed the call pane, reopened it. The line remained there like it had never belonged to the program in the first place. And the voice said, "You don't have to answer, Marin. I can hear the room." That was the point where my training and my nerves started arguing with each other. Training won, at first. I documented what I could. I checked whether a secondary device in the room was open and feeding back. I muted my mic. I unmuted it. I checked the radio channels for cross-traffic. Nothing. The room smelled suddenly hotter, that dry, overheated plastic smell from the rack equipment sharpening in my nose. My hands were steady, which felt important. If my hands are steady, I can work. I said in my normal dispatch voice, "This is Ada County Emergency Communications. Identify your location and the nature of your emergency." The voice waited just long enough to make it clear it had heard me. Then it said, "North wall vent clicks every 40 seconds. Your coffee's to the right of the keyboard. The break room light is on." While it was talking, the vent behind me gave its little plastic tick, and from across the room I saw the thin strip of yellow under the break nook door. Light on. I hadn't turned it on. That didn't make me panic. It made me irritated, which in hindsight was a gift because irritation let me keep functioning. If someone had gotten into the building network somehow, maybe with access from facilities or maintenance, then this was harassment. Specific, creepy harassment, but still something with a mechanism. I stood up and looked through the glass toward the break nook. The light was on. The microwave clock glowed dull green over the counter. Nothing moved. I said, "If you're inside the building, stay on the line." The voice said, "You can't leave the post unattended." It was correct. Overnight single operator means I don't go wandering the annex because somebody wants attention. If a real emergency call comes in while I'm checking a hallway, I'm the failure point. So I did the right thing. That's what bothers me. I did the right thing and it didn't matter. I locked the entry access from the console. I ran the building camera views. Front entrance empty, stairwell empty, hallway outside the office empty. Rear lot empty except for the sodium light washing everything that sick orange color. I could see my own car down there with frost beginning to form across the windshield. Just after 1:30, I called the on-call technician. Straight to voicemail, I called my supervisor. Voicemail. I sent the internal alert flag through maintenance and marked it urgent. The system accepted the ticket. No response. The malformed line disconnected on its own. For maybe 10 minutes, nothing happened. That was enough time for me to start rebuilding the normal shape of the night. I took 2 routine radio check-ins. I verified an address on an accident report. I rewrote my incident note in cleaner language because if I was going to hand this over to day shift, I wanted it to read professionally, not like I was spooked by a blank phone. Line. At 1:47, the line opened again. No alert tone this time. It was just there, alive on screen 3, blank origin, no log. Before I could speak, the caller said, "Someone's in the hall." At that exact second, from outside the office door, I heard a shoe scuff on the tile. Not a movie sound, not a stomp, just rubber catching and releasing on the floor, like somebody shifting their weight. My throat tightened so fast I had to swallow twice before any air went down. I turned my head toward the frosted glass strip in the office door. Nothing visible through it except the hallway light. I pressed the building intercom. "Who's in the hall?" No answer. The voice in my headset said, almost kindly, "Don't open it." I don't know how to explain what helplessness feels like when you're the person people call for help. It isn't screaming terror. It's something more humiliating than that. It's knowing every option you have is procedural and none of them fit the shape of what's happening. I radioed for a patrol unit welfare check at the annex. Coded low priority at first because I still didn't have enough to justify more. The nearest unit acknowledged, said he'd swing by after clearing a traffic stop. Estimated 20 minutes. 20 minutes is nothing until you have to account for it 1 minute at a time. I started tracking the night by the wall clock over the supervisor's dark workstation. 1:52, 1:56, 2:03. Every time the line reopened, it did it on a different station. Always active already, always blank. Sometimes the voice spoke first. Sometimes it just let me hear the room around me, the humming fluorescent lights, the soft chain rattle from the flagpole outside when the wind shifted. Once, very clearly, the sound of paper sliding over laminate, and I looked down to find the corner of my protocol card moving against my chest because my breathing had gotten too shallow and fast. At 2:10, the caller said, "You're pressing too hard with the pen." I was. I looked at my incident log and saw I'd carved a shallow groove through the paper under the words repeated internal route failure. My fingers had cramped around the pen without me noticing. At 2:26, the caller said, "Third drawer sticks if you pull straight out." I froze because that was true too. Third drawer on the spare station beside mine had always stuck unless you lifted slightly. Not important, not secret, but not something anybody should be narrating to me through a dead line. The deputy doing the welfare check finally arrived just before 2:30. I watched him on camera cross the parking lot, shoulders hunched against the cold, one hand on his jacket zipper. Relief hit so hard my knees felt briefly hollow. He came upstairs, checked the door, stepped inside, and I kept my voice controlled while I explained the routing anomaly. He looked around the room, then the hall, then the break nook. Found nothing, no forced entry, no extra vehicle, no one in the stairwell. He half smiled in that distracted cop way people do when they think they're being reassuring, and said it was probably some sort of spoof or line bleed. and tech could pull diagnostics in the morning. He stayed maybe 4 minutes. He had another call holding. While he was standing there, the line stayed dead. As soon as he left, it came back. "That was Officer Braddock," the voice said. "He forgot his gloves in the cruiser." I grabbed the camera view of the lot. The deputy was at his vehicle, bending to retrieve something from the passenger seat with the interior light on. That was when fear finally made it past training. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, thick and uneven. Sweat had started under my uniform shirt, cold at first and then clammy, sticking the fabric between my shoulder blades. I initiated full internal fault protocol. Hard reset on the call interface. Alternate headset. Manual relay bypass. None of it touched the line. I even killed audio on my primary console and moved to Station 2. The line followed me there before I'd fully logged in. From 3 in the morning on, the whole night became arithmetic. 3 hours until shift change. Then 2 hours and 40, then 2 hours and 18. I kept telling myself the same thing. Hold the post. Document. Endure. Morning staff arrives, tech runs diagnostics. This becomes a report instead of a situation. But the calls kept tightening around me like something learning my tolerance. At 3:12, the caller said, "When the heater comes on, the vent above the door smells like pennies." 3:13, the heater kicked on. The air that pushed through that vent had a hot metallic smell to it, dusty and red like old radiators and blood, even though I know that's not what blood smells like in real life. My mouth filled with that tin taste anyway. At 3:31, the caller said, "There's somebody in the break room." I switched cameras. The break nook camera was static, gray snow rolling across the feed. I called out, louder than I meant to, "Who's in here?" And from the headset immediately, the voice said in a whisper, "You are." I did break protocol then. I left my chair and went to the break nook door because some part of my brain needed a concrete threat I could see or clear. The office carpet ended at the threshold and the hall tile held the day's cold longer. I could feel it through the soles of my shoes. The break nook light buzzed overhead. Stale powdered creamer smell, burnt coffee, cleaning spray. Empty, nothing there except the counter, the microwave, the little sink with a spoon in it from my dinner break. But on the table was my incident pad. I'd left it at my workstation. It was open to the middle, and in the dim yellow light there was handwriting on the page. Mine. The same square print I use when I'm keeping notes on the phone. It said in blue ink, "Do not read aloud." My hands started shaking then, not wildly, just enough that the paper trembled when I picked it up. I didn't hear the line open again, but suddenly the headset in my ear carried the soft scratch of breath. I went back to the console and radioed for another unit. This time no low priority code. The dispatcher in the neighboring jurisdiction took the relay because my own screen was half frozen from the fault protocol. She asked for nature of emergency. I opened my mouth and realized I didn't have language that wouldn't sound insane. Suspicious internal communication event, possible building compromise, unknown subject. I heard how that sounded while I was saying it. No unit immediately available. Of course not. At 4:07, the line status changed. For the first time all night, the source field populated. It said internal, not an extension number, not a room tag, just internal. I stared at that word until the letters stopped looking real. Then the line opened and I heard rustling. Plastic against fabric. The dry scrape of lamination. I knew that sound because it was happening on my chest. My protocol card was brushing my ID badge as my breathing shook it. Then my own voice came through the headset, reading, in the event of internal systems failure, maintain position, document anomalies, await transfer of control. It was me, but not live. Not exactly recorded either. It lagged a fraction behind what I started to say aloud, like it was predicting my mouth and then arriving almost at the same time. I slapped a hand over the card on my chest hard enough to sting. The plastic edge dug into my palm. My voice in the headset continued, "Do not abandon primary station unless relieved by authorized personnel." I wasn't reading anymore. I had stopped. The voice kept going, "Still mine, still calm. Do not respond to unauthorized internal traffic." My lungs were pulling short, useless breaths. My fingers had gone numb except for the ache where the card corner pressed into them. I yanked the badge lanyard over my head and dropped it on the desk like it had heated up. The caller breathed once, close and soft, and said in my voice, "Good. I don't remember deciding to cry. I just remember my vision blurring while I kept working because there was nothing else to do." I stayed in that chair till morning with the headset crooked half off one ear, one hand on the radio, the other gripping the edge of the desk so hard my wrist locked up. The calls kept reopening, sometimes every few minutes, sometimes with long gaps that were worse because I had room to imagine movement in the hall. The voice never yelled. It never threatened me directly. It just kept proving it knew the room better than I did. At one point, close to 5:30, I heard tapping from the far wall in a pattern that almost sounded like fingers on glass. The caller said, "Almost done." When dawn started thinning the windows from black to dirty blue, I could smell the outside cold even through the sealed building. That mineral morning smell snow gives off before it actually falls. My replacement, Jenna, badge scanned in at 6:58. The second the door latch clicked and another person stepped into the office, every active line on my console cleared at once. No disconnect tone, no error, just gone. I must have looked bad because she stopped smiling before she'd fully set her bag down. I tried to explain. My voice sounded scraped raw. We checked the system logs together. Nothing. No malformed routes, no internal bridge. No active line history matching the times I'd documented. My maintenance ticket existed, but it showed no attached system fault. Tech came in at 9, ran diagnostics, and reported normal operations. No unauthorized outgoing connection from my station. No record of internal routing. No sign the system had ever done what it did all night. I went home and slept with the bathroom light on for almost a week because the apartment sounded too organized in the dark. I kept expecting some calm voice to start describing the room from inside the walls. I didn't quit right away. Needing the job doesn't care what happened to you. But I stopped clipping that protocol card to my chest. I kept it in the drawer after that. I could not stand feeling it move when I breathed. What I can't get past is the simplest part. The screen labeled those calls internal. Fine. Say somebody found a way into the building system. Say there was a hidden bridge. Some weird maintenance exploit. Some person with access who liked hearing how long I could hold together if they kept taking options away. I can live with any of those explanations better than the one thing the logs refuse to show. If the calls were internal, then they had to be going somewhere. They had to be coming from somewhere. But the system never registered any outgoing connection from my station. And I was the only one in that room until shift change, which means either there was another line inside, that office I still don't know about, or the thing talking to me never needed one. I transferred out of nights a month later. Officially, it was for scheduling reasons. Unofficially, I still can't sit in a silent office after 1 in the morning without counting how long it is until someone else is due to arrive. I watch the clock now the way people watch weather. I don't trust blank fields on screens. I don't trust active lines with no history. And every now and then, usually right before dawn when equipment noise gets thin enough to notice, I catch myself holding my breath so I can tell whether the sound in my headset is static or somebody waiting for the room to quiet down around me. Some people think the worst part of a story is the moment something almost happens. It isn't. It's the part after, when you realize how little would have needed to shift for nobody else to have any record of you at all. The next one wasn't about a phone system. It was quieter than that. That's why it lasted longer. That's why the person telling it didn't understand what they were looking at until the pieces were already in place. Story 2. The logbook entry I didn't write. The first time I saw my own handwriting describing something I had not done yet, I didn't get scared. I got embarrassed. That's the truth. I thought I was tired, sloppy, older than I liked admitting. Maybe one of those people who starts doing things automatically and then forgets they did them. It would have been easier if that had been all it was. Easier if I'd just skipped a memory somewhere between one patrol and the next. But when I think back on that night now, what bothers me isn't the future timestamp or the camera feed or even the last line that showed up after I took the book home. It's how ordinary everything felt when the evidence first started lining up. The building was clean. The lights were steady. My footsteps sounded normal. Nothing about it acted like a warning. My name is Nolan Pike. I was 42 when this happened, and I worked overnight security at a corporate office building in Hartford, Connecticut on Pearl Street. 8 floors of accountants, legal, support staff, and conference rooms nobody used after sunset. I was comfortable alone. That's one of the reasons they liked me on nights. Some people hear a building empty out and start inventing things to fear. I heard relief. No small talk, no elevator chatter. Just a routine. Every hour I made my rounds, checked doors, looked over the camera wall, logged anything out of place by hand. I preferred writing to digital reports. My shift logs lived in a locked drawer under the security desk because I didn't trust people not to borrow things and put them back wrong. Same black notebook style every month. Same blue ballpoint if I could help it. This was late October. Cold enough outside that the marble in the lobby held a little bite even through shoe soles. Inside, the building always smelled like cleaning chemicals after the janitorial crew finished. Citrus over bleach, sharp enough to catch at the back of your nose. Hallways on the upper floors had that thin echo empty office buildings get. Your own steps coming back to you delayed by half a second, so it sounds like somebody behind you. Matching pace. I knew every motion sensor by habit. I knew which ones triggered too fast and which ones needed a full step under them before the lights woke up. There was comfort in that. If something changed, I noticed. My shift started at 10. By a little after midnight, I'd done 2 normal patrols. No open doors, no alarms. Just one flickering light outside a conference room on 6 that had been on the maintenance list for a week. I came back down to the security desk in the lobby to write my 3rd entry and found one already there. Written in my handwriting. North stairwell clear. 4th floor west corridor lights delayed by 3 seconds. Smell of solvent stronger near records room. No persons observed. I stood there looking at it longer than I want to admit. My first thought was simple. I must have written that early. Maybe during the last round, maybe while I was half listening to the radio, maybe absent-mindedly planning the next patrol to save time. People do that. I do not usually do that, but I could see myself doing it once. Then I looked at the timestamp I had written beside it. 1:15 in the morning. It was only 12:47. I remember actually smiling at that, tight and stupid. Because the only explanation that felt safer than forgetting was that I'd written the wrong time. That's the kind of reasoning I was doing. Not passive denial. Work, active little stacks of logic I kept building because each one held for maybe 30 seconds before something else poked through. I unlocked the drawer, checked the earlier pages to see if I'd been sloppy anywhere else. Normal entries. Normal times. No drift. Same pressure in the pen strokes. Same slight lean to the right in my print. I told myself I'd just gotten ahead of myself. Fine. I crossed nothing out because I hate messy logs, shut the drawer and went upstairs to do the round exactly as written so the book would at least become true. That was the first part that should have bothered me more. It did become true. The 4th floor west corridor lights did delay by about 3 seconds. I stood there watching the long carpeted hallway glow on in sections, hearing the HVAC push dry warm air through ceiling vents, and thinking, see, you know the building so well. You pre-wrote the details. The solvent smell near records was there too, maybe from the cleaning crew's cabinet. Nothing dramatic, nothing I could point to and say this is the moment a sane person leaves. When I came back down, I wrote the actual time and moved on. At 2 in the morning, I unlocked the drawer for the next entry and found another one. Loading dock secure. Camera 12 briefly loses frame when subject crosses left to right. Patrol paused at copy room glass to observe reflection. Timestamp 2:35. The thing is, I don't pause to observe my reflection. I'm not that guy. So even before the future time hit me, that sentence bothered me in a way I didn't have a name for yet. It wasn't wrong exactly. It was just written like somebody using my hand had a slightly sideways idea of how I think. I checked camera 12 right then. Live feed only. No playback at the desk without logging into the manager terminal, which I wasn't supposed to do unless there was an incident. The loading dock camera looked normal, gray concrete, striped bollards, a rolling metal door with old dents near the bottom. No subject, no frame loss. I considered calling the building manager. Then I imagined explaining that my own notebook was getting ahead of me. I could hear how that would sound. Sleep-deprived guard invents a mystery because he's bored. So I did what felt reasonable. I tested myself. I went on patrol and intentionally changed my route. I took the service elevator to 5 instead of the east stairs. I checked the break area before the dock. I avoided the copy room glass completely. When I came back, there was fresh indentation on the next page before I even turned it. Subject altered route. Entered 5th floor first. Stood outside pantry longer than necessary. Returned to expected path at 2:29. That word, subject, sat there like a splinter. I could feel it under every thought. I told myself a janitor had gotten into my desk as a joke. Then I remembered the drawer had been locked and the spare key hung on my own ring. I told myself I was somehow writing without remembering and then discovering it later. Then I asked myself how I could be doing that with the drawer locked between rounds. Each explanation required something worse than the thing I was explaining away. I unlocked the manager terminal and pulled camera playback. That decision is the part I return to most because I could have left it alone. I could have logged an equipment issue and kept the rest blurry. Instead, I made the fragments line up. Camera 12 at the loading dock showed me cross the frame at 2:34. The picture glitched exactly as the book said. One ugly little smear left to right, not enough to lose a person entirely, but enough to drag my body out into a pale blur for half a second. I wasn't at the loading dock at 2:34. At least I don't think I was. This is where the terror becomes retroactive for me, because at the time I didn't jump to impossible conclusions. I started checking whether the camera timestamp was wrong, whether I'd looked at the wrong clip, whether the glitch had grabbed footage from an earlier patrol and stamped it new. Every mundane possibility got a full hearing from me because the alternative required too much. Then I watched the 4th floor hallway feed from 1:15. There I was walking west corridor exactly as described, shoulders a little hunched, flashlight bouncing at my side. Nothing strange until I reached the copy room glass. I did stop there. I turned toward it and stood still for maybe 4 seconds. I had no memory of that. The feed had no audio, but even without it I knew the building sound that would have been there. Air handling, far elevator cables, my own shoes pressing into office carpet. I watched myself in the grainy black and white image face the dark glass like I was listening to somebody on the other side. When I went back to the desk, the lobby felt off in a very specific way. Too polished, the lemon cleaners smelled too bright. The hum from the vending machine louder than before. Not threatening, just arranged. Like the building had been sitting through my routines long enough to learn where to place details. The next entry in the book was already waiting. 3:08. Subject checking book again. Right hand shaking slightly. Keeps glancing at camera wall instead of main entrance. That was true too. My right hand was shaking enough that the page made a faint clicking sound against the ring binding. I hadn't noticed until I read it. I stopped writing altogether after that. I closed the notebook, locked it in the drawer, and decided I would finish the shift on incident memory alone, then report a possible unauthorized desk access and maybe also mention fatigue. That still seemed more plausible than whatever shape was forming. At 3:30, motion sensor on 7 tripped. Empty hallway on camera. Lights came on anyway, bleaching the corridor into that flat office brightness that always makes the carpet look slightly green. Then sensor on 6. Then 4. Not random. A path downward. I watched each floor light up a few seconds apart. I told myself it was fact current fluctuation. Then a maintenance issue. Then maybe some kind of delayed test cycle. You can hear the effort in those explanations even now. I was building them while already knowing they would fail. I checked the drawer again because by then I didn't know what else to do. The notebook had one new line at the bottom of a page I had not opened earlier. Do not use the South Hall on 5. No timestamp this time. I should tell you that 5 South was the quietest part of the building. Executive suites, carpet thicker than the other floors, glass offices with the blinds always drawn. I almost went there anyway out of stubbornness. Instead, I stood in the lobby for a full minute with my keyring cold in my hand, staring at the elevator display and listening to the relay click in the wall every time another empty sensor triggered above me. Then I took the north side stairs to 5. The air changed halfway up. Stronger chemical smell, but not from the cleaners. Something sharper, like marker solvent or fresh copier ink, the kind of smell that makes the back of your throat feel dry. When I opened onto 5 North, the lights were already on down the hall, even though the motion sensor shouldn't have seen me from there. That raised a little pressure in my chest I couldn't breathe around. Still not full fear. More like my body had started understanding the pattern before my mind would agree to it. I walked slowly toward the South Corridor junction. Carpet muffled everything except the faint creak of my radio clip against my jacket zipper. The offices were dark behind glass. My flashlight reflected me back at myself in narrow pieces. There was a camera dome over the corner. Tiny red status light. Steady. My notebook had said, "Do not use the South Hall." There was another line in the book, too, waiting downstairs, though I didn't know it yet. It would later say, "Hallway lights already active when subject arrives." I turned the corner into 5 South, and the lights were already on. Not warming up, not sensor delayed. On. That was the moment the building stopped feeling like a place and started feeling like a completed sentence. The hall looked ordinary. Beige walls, framed abstract prints, closed office doors. But the light had that too clean look fluorescent tubes get when they've been sitting on in an empty space for no reason. Halfway down, one office door stood just slightly open, enough to show a slice of darkness. My pulse had climbed so high I could feel it beating in the soft roof of my mouth. My palm kept slipping on the flashlight grip. I took one step, then another, because I still needed this to become a person or a prank or a maintenance issue. Any solid thing. At the end of the corridor outside the corner conference room, there was a motion sensor on the ceiling. Small white disc. It clicked on before I reached its range. The sound was tiny. That's the part I remember. Just that tiny plastic click, like a nail-tapping porcelain. I stopped. The lights in the conference room came on through the frosted glass. In my jacket pocket, my pen leaked a small dot of ink onto my thumb because I jammed it in there uncapped earlier without noticing. I stared at the blue stain, then pulled the notebook from under my arm because at some point I'd brought it with me without remembering that either. The latest entry was already there in my handwriting. 3:52. Subject reaches 5 South as lights trigger in advance. Stands still. Reads entry. Steps forward anyway. The timestamp on my watch clicked over to 3:52 while I was reading it. I did step forward. Exactly 1 pace. Maybe because the book said I would. Maybe because I was angry. Maybe because by then terror and curiosity had become the same physical sensation. a hard vibrating pressure in my chest. The office door halfway down the hall moved another inch inward on its own, or on air pressure, or because somebody behind it had just taken their hand away. I don't know, I didn't check. That was as close to a peek as anything that night had, and it wasn't loud. No attack, no chase, just the complete understanding that I was arriving inside a sequence that had been written before I reached it. I backed up slowly, eyes on that door, then turned and walked fast without quite running because some stupid part of me still didn't want to behave dramatically in an empty office building. I finished the shift. That's the most absurd sentence in this whole story, but it's true. I stayed at the desk till morning with the notebook shut and my keys in my hand and every camera feed up at once. No more entries appeared while I was there. Dawn staff drifted in with travel mugs and scarves and elevator chatter like nothing had happened. I should have left the notebook in the locked drawer. Instead, I slid it into my bag and took it home. I told myself it was evidence. I told myself I needed to examine it in daylight. Really, I think I wanted to prove it became normal somewhere outside that building. At home, I put it on my kitchen table and didn't open it until afternoon. Sun was coming through the blinds in stripes. My apartment smelled like toast because I kept trying to make breakfast and forgetting to eat it. When I finally looked, there was a final entry on the last written page. Shift ended without incident. Subject removed book from premises. Believes this interrupts sequence. Purchased new pen next Thursday. Ink flows better than the old one. I sat there so long my coffee went cold beside my hand. The line about the pen didn't mean anything then because I hadn't bought it yet. A week later, at an office supply store on my lunch break at a different job, I bought a blue pen because mine had started skipping. Cheap pack near the register. When I tested it at home, the color matched the last entry exactly. Same darker blue. Same way the lines started heavy and then settled. I never went back to that building after I handed in my notice. I told them family reasons. They didn't push. I kept the notebook locked in a metal box in my hall closet for months before finally sealing it in a storage tote I never open. People ask why I didn't turn it over to police or a forensic examiner or anybody official. The answer is humiliatingly simple. I didn't want to hear somebody explain it in a tone that made me sound tired or unstable or vain enough to think a building had been paying attention to me. Also, I was afraid they'd open it and find nothing unusual at all. What still gets under my skin isn't a question of whether something supernatural happened. I don't believe that. I don't know what I believe, exactly. Maybe someone had access to the desk, the cameras, my routines, maybe more than one person. Maybe the book was part of something methodical and private and human, which in some ways is worse. But the part that never settles is the incompleteness of it. I don't know what was waiting in that office on 5 South. I don't know why the camera caught me stopping at reflective glass before I remembered doing it. I don't know whether the sequence ended because I took the notebook away, or whether taking it away was always part of the sequence to begin with. I still keep handwritten notes, but not in order. Never by hour. Never in a single place. If I write something down at night now, I check the timestamp twice and then I cap the pen and put it in another room. And if I wake up and find a note on the table that I don't remember making, I don't read it until the clock has had time to catch up. That's not caution. That's just the closest thing I have to a rule. The next story came from somebody younger than me. Somebody who should have had more people around and somehow ended up with fewer one schedule adjustment at a time. Mine taught me what it feels like to watch evidence assemble around you. His taught me something uglier. Sometimes a pattern isn't there to explain what happened. Sometimes it's there to make sure nobody interrupts it. Story 3. The break room schedule. The worst part of that job wasn't the warehouse itself. It wasn't the size of it, or the noise, or the cold concrete, or the way whole sections would go dead quiet between conveyor cycles so fast it felt like somebody had pulled the sound out of the air with a plug. It was that everything in there looked organized enough to trust. Schedules on boards, break times color-coded, punch card machine right by the break room door stamping the minute in red ink like that made the place fair. When my break changed the first time, I didn't think somebody was isolating me. I thought I was being difficult in my own head, the way I always do when something feels off and everyone else seems normal. By the time I heard those voices outside the door talking about my location like I was a package moving through zones, I understood the schedule had never been for efficiency. It was for overlap. And the moment they stopped letting me overlap with anybody, I should have walked. My name's Keaton Hale. I was 22 then, living with 2 roommates in Kansas City, working late shift at a distribution warehouse near Front Street because rent was due whether the work was good or not. I hated being alone in big places. I've always hated it. Not because I think something paranormal is waiting in empty buildings, nothing like that. I just don't like the feeling that if something weird happens, there's nobody around to tell me I'm reading it wrong. But that job paid a little better than the grocery store warehouse I'd left, and they promised structure. Scanners, zones, quotas. Scheduled breaks down to the minute. You clock in, you move inventory, you swipe your punch card for break, you keep your head down. I could do that. The warehouse was huge, bigger than it looked from outside. Long aisles of shelving, wrapped pallets, cardboard dust always in the air. Conveyor belts ran overhead in parts of it, low mechanical hum all night, with this intermittent clatter when bins switched tracks that made your shoulders jump even after you got used to it. The break room sat off the central aisle near receiving. Beige walls, 2 vending machines, a coffee pot that always smelled burned no matter who made it. The punch card machine was mounted outside the door in a gray metal housing, old enough that the stamp hit hard. Every break got its own little red timestamp. You could hear other people's cards getting punched from halfway down the lane if it was quiet. I started just after Thanksgiving. By mid-December, I'd learned the basics. Enough names to nod at people, enough habits to avoid looking clueless. I wasn't friends with anybody there exactly. A few co-workers were nice, but I was still new and I didn't want to be the kid who complained. That matters. It shaped a lot of what happened because every single time I could have asked a direct question, I pictured the answer being some version of "Relax, man. It's just how we run things." On the night this happened, my shift started at 6 in the evening. The air outside was damp and cold, and inside the warehouse it smelled like cardboard, dust, machine oil, and the fake cinnamon from somebody's holiday hand soap in the break room. At first, everything was normal. I was assigned to Zone C, scanning returns and restocking mislabeled bins. My first break was supposed to be at 9:40. I knew that because I check schedules too much. I like knowing exactly when things happen. Around 8:30, I walked past the board near the supervisor station and saw my break had been moved to 10:05. Not a huge deal. It happens. Supervisors adjust for workload. I remember actually feeling relief more than annoyance because later meant more people in the room maybe. More overlap. I told myself not to make a thing out of it. Then, at 10:05, when I punched out for break, nobody else came in behind me. The break room was empty. Vending machine hum, microwave splatter smell. One of those little holiday radio stations playing too quietly through somebody's phone speaker on the table and then stopping. Because I realized it wasn't a phone at all, it was the buzz from the fluorescent ballast in the corner fixture. I sat with my sandwich and listened to my own wrapper crackle too loud in the room. Through the wall I could hear conveyor chains running, then pausing, then one sharp belt restart like a cough. I told myself everybody else's break must have shifted too. Normal. Seasonal volume. Nothing personal. Still, I checked the schedule board on my way out, casual like I wasn't checking. 2 other names that had been near mine earlier were now 10 minutes apart in opposite directions. That should have been enough. It wasn't. The next cycle gave me a little release. One of the guys from loading, name was Everett, passed me in the cross aisle and said, "Man, you get around quick." I laughed like I knew what he meant and said what he said. "Saw you by outbound like 5 minutes ago. I hadn't been near outbound all night." There are a million non-creepy explanations for that. Similar build. Similar vest. Bad light. I grabbed one immediately and used it. "Probably Jace," I said, because Jace and I were both skinny and wore the same orange gloves the company handed out. Everett shrugged and kept going. But for the next half hour I couldn't stop thinking about how fast he said it, no hesitation, like he'd definitely seen me. Every reflective plastic curtain I passed after that, I checked my own shape in it. Same navy hoodie under the safety vest. Same black beanie. Same cracked scanner holster clip on my belt. Not unique. Could have been anybody. At 11:15 I went for my second break. That one had originally been set for 11:30. Again, nobody overlapping. The room already smelled like ramen and burnt cheese from people who had clearly been in there earlier. Warm air from the soda machine fan pushed against my ankles under the table. I stood there with my card in my hand and listened to the warehouse go suddenly quiet between conveyor cycles. No belt hum, no rolling cages, no voices. Just the tiny hard tick from the punch card machine resetting its stamp. I sat for maybe 3 minutes before the machine outside the door punched by itself. Not the full sound, not card in, stamp, card out, just the hard internal impact like the mechanism had fired once with nothing in it. I stared at the door. I should have opened it. Instead, I stayed still because I was already picturing how stupid I'd look if somebody had just brushed the machine, or if old gears sometimes did that and everyone knew it but me. That's what the social thing does. It keeps you in bad situations because humiliation feels more immediate than danger. When my break ended, I fed my card into the machine and looked at the stamp. The red time was 11:14, 1 minute before I'd actually swiped. I checked my phone lock screen, 11:15. I checked the wall clock inside the break room, same. I held the card longer than necessary, thumb rubbing the fresh ink because I wanted to find the smear that would make it a mechanical double hit or some kind of obvious error. There wasn't one. Just the clean little timestamp a minute early. I could have gone to a supervisor then. Instead, I slid the card back in my pocket and went to zone work, because explaining a 1-minute discrepancy in a place built entirely on minutes felt pathetic. That's how I kept talking myself down. Not nothing, exactly. Just too small to say out loud. The next part made it harder. A girl from packing named Lindsay stopped me near the tape station and said, "Were you looking for me earlier?" I said no. She frowned like she was trying to be polite. "Somebody in your hoodie was standing by the seasonal racks." Just standing there, I told her she had the wrong person. She said maybe. But she kept looking at me while she said it in a way that made me feel like maybe I'd done something embarrassing and forgotten. My skin got prickly under my vest. All at once I was aware of every camera bubble over every intersection, every scanner beep, every name tag I hadn't learned. I started checking the schedule board every time I passed it. At first it looked normal. A dry erase grid under fluorescent lights, names and break blocks and lunch windows. Then I noticed my row had more fresh marker shine than the others. Tiny thing, just the way the black ink caught light, like it had been changed more recently. My break windows had shifted by a few minutes each, just enough to separate me from the people nearest my station. Not by a lot, nothing dramatic, nothing a supervisor couldn't explain with workload balancing. But if you followed it through the night, every adjustment nudged me toward empty spaces. That was the first build. Then I got a release. A supervisor actually noticed me looking and said, "You good, Keaton?" I said, "Yeah, just checking lunch." He nodded and kept walking, normal. Casual. The kind of nothing interaction that almost made me feel foolish for spiraling. At 12:30 I had a clean hour. Scans matched, belts moved. People passed close enough to hear them joking about sports and somebody's broken truck window. I started thinking maybe the warehouse just had bad timing and bad lighting, and I was doing that thing where I make a pattern because the alternative to no pattern is randomness. And I hate randomness more. Then, at 1 in the morning, I swiped back from a restroom break I hadn't even been scheduled for, and the punch card machine stamped 1:59 before the card fully seated. I watched it happen, saw the stamp hit early. A weird tightness climbed into my chest so fast I had to breathe through my mouth for a second. My fingers went damp around the edge of the card. There was no rational way to make myself not care about that, so I switched to the social way again. Maybe if I brought it up, they'd say, "Yeah, old machine does that sometimes, welcome to nights." Maybe they'd laugh. Maybe they'd ask why I was staring at the timestamp machine like it had insulted me. So I kept working. That cycle got worse. Another partial release, then worse again. Everett asked if I was okay because he saw me near receiving twice in 10 minutes. I hadn't been near receiving once. Then Jace said, "Bro, if you wanted my pallet jack, you could have just asked. No need to lurk." I said I hadn't touched his pallet jack. He grinned like he thought I was messing with him. All right. When people think you're joking, it doesn't matter how true you sound. I started noticing other things then. Fresh marker on the schedule board every time I checked. Break cards clipped on the supervisor ring in a different order than earlier. A line lead walking by my aisle, glancing not at the shelf labels but at me, then at the overhead clock. Not dramatic. Just enough that each thing sat next to the last thing and made a larger shape. At 1:35 my scheduled break changed again. I didn't see who did it. I just saw the old time half erased and the new one written in. 150. Nobody else's changed that cycle, only mine. I told myself I had to stop this before it got bigger in my head. I would take the break, sit down, text one of my roommates something normal, reset, then maybe ask quietly in the office if schedules were final or flexible. That was the plan. Small, reasonable, not a scene. I punched out at 150. The machine stamped 149. The break room was empty again. This time the silence felt arranged. Vending machine buzz. Refrigerator kicking on with a low shudder. Faint detergent smell from somebody's wiped-up spill. My pulse was beating so hard in my wrists that when I peeled the cap off my water bottle, the plastic crack sounded synced to it. I sat facing the door because suddenly I didn't want my back to it. Through the wired glass window I could see a slice of the corridor outside and the gray metal body of the punch machine. 2 minutes in, voices passed outside. Not close conversation. Coordinated talking. Low. Fast. Practical. He's in there. 5 more. Move lunch on D block. Not yet. I stopped breathing for a second, just listening. Not because I was trying to hide, my body just did it. I got up and went to the door quietly, feeling stupid even as I did it. Maybe they were talking about a pallet. Maybe they were talking about some guy named Keith. I put my hand on the push bar. Before I pressed it, the door clicked, automatic closer engaged. Not locked exactly, but held. I pushed. It gave maybe half an inch and then stopped like pressure was coming from the other side. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like missing a step in the dark. I pushed again, harder. Nothing. Outside, one of the voices said, "Hold till 2:04. Another said, "Board updated." I looked through the wired glass and could just see the schedule board at the far end of the corridor. If I leaned, somebody had moved it closer earlier. I hadn't noticed. From that angle I could see fresh markers streaking across it. My row changed while I was watching. A black line erased, a new break block written in, quick practiced movements by a hand and shoulder I couldn't fully see. My mouth had gone dry enough that swallowing hurt. I said too softly at first, "Hey." No answer. Then louder, "Hey, open the door." The voices stopped. A different voice, close to the glass but too low for me to make out clearly, said something that might have been "stay on it" or "he's on it." I don't know. That's what paranoia does. It turns every half-heard syllable into 5 possible meanings and makes all of them bad. I hit the push bar again. Hard. Metal rattled in the frame. The punch card machine outside stamped once, then again. Then a third time, each hit crisp and final, like people clocking breaks around me without anyone ever entering. My hands were slick. They kept slipping off the bar. My chest felt tight and hot at the same time. And there was this strange cold sweat starting under my arms, down my ribs. I pulled my phone out and saw 1 bar, then none, then 1 again. I texted Everett because his number was still open from a shift swap thread. "You near break room." Door stuck, no send, just spinning. Outside, footsteps moved away in 2 directions at once, 1 set left, 1 right. A pattern opening. Then, from the schedule board area, a voice said, "He's early. Shift zone B." My location. Not my name. My location. That was the real confirmation. Not the stuck door. Not the early timestamps. That wording. The people outside that room weren't improvising. They were adjusting around where I was in real time. I started hitting the door with my shoulder because I didn't know what else to do. Each impact shoved the bar in a little and sent a shock down my arm. The room smelled suddenly awful. Old coffee grounds, hot plastic. my own sweat going sour through the hoodie. I was breathing too fast and getting less air every time. The vending machine lights blurred at the edges. Somewhere outside, conveyor belts kicked back on and the whole floor vibrated faintly under my shoes. I remember thinking stupidly, don't pass out in a break room. Because then what? Then people would find me and have a version of the story that made me the problem. I don't know how long I was in there. It felt long. It was probably minutes. The voices outside came and went, never panicked, never raised, just instructions. Now, move him after. Watch receiving. It sounded like planning, not anger. That made it worse. Anger at least belongs to a moment. Planning stretches backward. Then the handle jerked. The door opened inward, so suddenly I stumbled. Everett stood there holding 2 energy drinks and looking confused. Dude, why were you leaning on the door? Cold air from the corridor hit the sweat on my shirt and made my whole body shake once. Behind him, the hall looked ordinary. Punch machine by the door. Schedule board at the end. No crowd, no cluster of men waiting to pretend they hadn't been there. Just one line lead near the board making a note with a marker. I looked past Everett and said, "Who was just out here?" He turned. Nobody. I stepped into the corridor and saw my break row on the board. It had changed again. My next block overlapped with Everett's by exactly 2 minutes now, like the system had corrected itself the second he came back early and broke whatever pattern they'd been building. I left before the shift ended. I didn't clear it, didn't tell a supervisor a full story. I said I was sick, which was true enough by then, and walked out with my card in my pocket and my throat so tight I could barely answer Everett when he asked if I needed a ride. The parking lot air felt huge and wet and freezing. I sat in my car with the doors locked and watched the entrance until my vision steadied enough to drive. I never went back. Not for my final paycheck. Not for the hoodie I left in the locker. Nothing. HR called twice. I let it ring. They mailed the check eventually. For a while I kept my punch card in a drawer at home because I thought if I looked at the times enough they'd turn into mechanical errors instead of what they felt like. But the stamps were clean. Early by seconds, sometimes a minute. Sometimes just enough to matter if you're coordinating bodies through space. I showed it to nobody because I didn't want the expression people get when they decide you're either exaggerating or inviting them to solve you. The question that stays with me isn't whether those people outside the room meant to hurt me. I don't know that. Maybe the plan was smaller. Maybe it was hazing or testing or some workplace thing so ugly and petty I almost prefer not to name it. But I know the schedule wasn't random, and I know it kept changing to make sure my breaks happened alone, and I know a coworker walking back early was the only thing that broke. The pattern, that's the part I can't stop worrying at. If Everett hadn't forgotten his second energy drink and doubled back when he did, if my row had been shifted 5 minutes later instead of earlier, if the machine had stamped me somewhere a little farther from people and the board had updated once more before anyone noticed, would anybody have realized I was missing before the end of shift? Or would they just have read the schedule and assumed I was where it said I should be? I work days now. Small place. Tiny staff. No punch cards. If I take a break, I want another human being to look up and see me leave. That's not paranoia to me anymore. That's inventory. People think fear is loud, but mine isn't. Mine is walking past a laminated schedule in a hallway and feeling my stomach knot because I need to know whether the names on it create overlap or gaps. The next story starts in a place that should have felt safer than a warehouse. Bright office, assigned desk, morning routine, all the little personal objects people leave out because they think routine protects them. That's the kind of horror I understand now. The kind that doesn't need to chase you because it was already sitting where you planned to. Story 4. The desk someone used. What got me out of that office wasn't some huge obvious disaster. It was heat. The chair was warm. That's still the detail that comes back first. Not the files on my computer, not the message on my desktop, not even the taste in the mug that wasn't mine. Just the plain physical warmth of the seat under me, like somebody had stood up a breath before I arrived and I had somehow missed them by seconds inside a locked routine I thought belonged to me. I used to think invasion would look messy, drawers pulled open, things stolen, obvious signs. It doesn't. Sometimes it looks like your own desk, almost perfectly reset by somebody who knows exactly what you'll notice and what you'll talk yourself out of. My name is Tessa Rowan. I was 31, and I worked operations support for a marketing firm in Denver. In an open-plan office on the 5th floor of a building on Blake Street with one of those polished concrete lobbies that always smells faintly like wet stone in the morning. I liked getting in early. It was routine by then. Same train, same corner coffee cart if the line was short, same desk tucked near the window row on the east side. I was comfortable alone in offices. More productive, honestly. No chatter, no drop-ins, no someone asking if I saw an email they just sent 30 seconds ago. I left a dark blue ceramic mug on my desk every day. Same spot. Right of the monitor on a cork coaster with a coffee ring permanently printed into it. The desk arrangement around me was almost perfectly symmetrical across our section. Mine was the only one with anything personal besides a plant or family photo. This happened in early spring. Cold morning, thin sunlight, everybody still carrying jackets indoors because the vac never matched the weather outside. I badge accessed in a little before 7:30 and immediately noticed my chair was pulled out maybe 3 inches from where I always left it. That did not alarm me. Cleaning staff moved chairs all the time. They vacuumed at night. I remember actually smiling to myself because I had meant to push it in the evening before and must have forgotten. That's how generously I was reading everything then. I am by nature somebody who picks the favorable explanation first, not because I'm gullible. Just because most of the time the favorable explanation is the right one. I set my bag down, hung my coat on the divider hook and noticed my mug. It was in the correct spot, exactly where I always leave it, handle angled left because I pick it up with my right hand and rotate it. But there was a brown tide line inside higher than where I usually fill tea, and the residue at the bottom was grainier, like instant coffee crystals or hot chocolate mix not. Fully dissolved, I lifted it and smelled the rim, not my mint tea. Something sweeter, stale and milky. I stood there with the mug in my hand for a second, then laughed under my breath because the obvious explanation was still obvious. Cleaning staff rinsed something in it by mistake. A coworker borrowed it before their own dishes were back from the sink. Weird, a little rude but not sinister. I rinsed it out at the kitchenette and came back. My monitor was awake. I never leave it awake. Again, explainable. It patches overnight, machine wakes during update. Maybe I forgot to lock it yesterday because I was rushing for a call. I sat down, still in a pretty decent mood, and that's when I saw 3 recent files open in the taskbar, all spreadsheets from a client folder I hadn't touched since the previous week. I clicked them open, expecting to find autosave recovery or background indexing artifacts. They were real, viewed within the last hour according to file history, not edited, just opened. I could feel the first thin line of discomfort, that not panic, more the sensation of a private room with a window you hadn't known about. I checked the office chat. No messages from it, no overnight maintenance notice. I checked our remote login records. Nothing obvious from where I could see as a normal user. I told myself this was probably a sync issue from cloud backup, or maybe my manager had used my machine in a hurry because hers was rebooting and figured I wouldn't mind. That actually sounded plausible enough that I held on to it for several more minutes. Then I found the document on the desktop. No file name, just new document with today's date. I opened it and saw 2 sentences. You keep aspirin in the second drawer, under the sticky notes. Your train was late yesterday because of the signal problem by Welton. The phrasing was wrong in a way that's hard to explain if you didn't see it. Not threatening, not ungrammatical, just wrong for anybody who actually knew me. I don't say your train. My coworkers would have said the train or your commute, or more likely they wouldn't have written that at all, because why would they? The aspirin detail hit harder. I did keep a travel bottle in the second drawer under the sticky notes. No one needed that information. I remember sitting very still, reading it twice and trying as hard as I could to keep it harmless. Maybe a bizarre office joke, maybe somebody trying to prove they were observant and landing in creepy by accident. People do odd things when they're trying to seem funny. I looked around the office, fluorescent lights humming softly overhead, ventilation moving that dry recycled air that always smells faintly of coffee grounds and printer toner by 8 in the morning. Empty desks in neat rows, every monitor dark except mine. The whole floor had that pre-work hush where any small sound carries. Somewhere in another suite a copier started up, then stopped. I opened my second drawer. The aspirin bottle was there, but it had been turned label down. That was the first moment my body reacted before my thoughts did. My fingers tingled. Not dramatic shaking, just that loss of certainty in the hands when you reach for something and your grip doesn't trust itself. I put the drawer back carefully, almost politely. I don't know why I should have gone straight to building security. Instead, I did one more pass through normal explanations because that was my reflex. Maybe my manager had looked for supplies. Maybe the cleaning crew opened drawers dusting, though that made no sense. Maybe someone from it had been at the desk during the evening and noticed the aspirin while borrowing a charger. I was actively working to keep the situation from becoming what it was becoming. Then I clicked into my browser history and found a search from before 7 in the morning for my apartment street parking rules. Not company-related. Not accidental. My stomach tightened so hard I had to lean back and breathe shallow for a second. My mouth tasted like stale coffee even though I hadn't had any yet. I got up to go to the kitchen and ran into Margot from finance coming in early. I asked as casually as I could whether anyone had been in our section before me. She shrugged, balancing her breakfast yogurt and phone. Cleaning, maybe. Why? I almost told her. Instead, I said, my chair was moved. She smiled like that was barely worth a sentence. Yeah, they do that. And that was that. The social world stayed smooth. I was the only one feeling the edge under it. When I got back to my desk, the screen had gone to lock. I touched the mouse. It unlocked without asking for my password. I think if that had happened on its own without everything before it, I could have maybe blamed a setting. Maybe badge-based login, maybe cached auth, maybe some security policy I'd ignored. But stacked on top of the mug, the files, the note, the drawer, it landed different. My chest went tight and hot, and I could feel my pulse low in my throat. I sat down because my knees had gone a little unreliable. The chair was still warm, not room temperature, warm. I came up off it so fast the wheels squeaked on the floor. There was a smell on the fabric under the general office smell, faint cologne or detergent. Something clean and unfamiliar, and maybe it had been there the whole time, but I only let myself notice it then. The monitor flashed. A message window opened on its own. No sender name, just an unsaved document again. I know you won't use the mug now. My scalp prickled so hard it almost hurt. I looked behind me. Empty aisle. Margot at her desk around the divider, spoon-tapping against yogurt cup. Elevator ding far off. Normal office noises. My hands were cold and slick at the same time. I said not loudly, "Who is doing this?" No answer from the room. The cursor blinked once. Then new text appeared, slowly enough that I could watch each word form. Sit down. That was the point where optimistic interpretation finally went silent in my head. No more maybe. No more harmless misunderstanding. Whatever had access to my desk had access before I arrived, had time before I arrived, and either someone was still close enough to see me or had already learned me well enough to predict exactly what would matter. I grabbed my bag. My phone was in the side pocket. I meant to call security. Instead, I fumbled it hard enough that it hit the desk and slid under the monitor stand. My fingers were numb at the tips. Behind me, Margot laughed at something on her screen, bright and normal and so out of place that it made me feel separated from the rest of the room by glass. The monitor opened another file. This one was a screenshot of my desktop from an angle slightly above and behind the chair. Not live, I think. I hope not. But recent enough that my mug in the image still had that residue line. I backed away from the desk. The chair wheels rolled forward half an inch on their own, maybe from the uneven floor, maybe from my bag brushing them, maybe not. I didn't stay to test it. I took my phone, left the coat, left the lunch in my bag, and walked fast, then faster, then almost ran once I hit the elevator lobby. I remember jabbing the call button too many times, then giving up and taking the stairs because waiting in a box felt impossible. My breath was too short by the second landing. The stairwell smelled like concrete dust and old mop water. Every step slapped loud enough to make me think someone was above me, matching pace. I went straight outside onto Blake Street in the morning cold and stayed there until building security met me in the lobby. By the time we went back up with them, my machine was locked normally. The message files were gone. My chair was in place. My mug sat rinsed and dry. That was almost worse than if everything had stayed. It made me sound uncertain while I was still shaking. I did not return to that workspace. HR called it a temporary relocation at first. Then they offered remote. Then, without much explanation, they boxed my things and shipped them to my apartment. The mug came wrapped in brown paper. The aspirin bottle was still in the second drawer contents bag with the label facing down. No one ever gave me a name. No one told me it found a breach. or security found a badge access anomaly, or a coworker confessed to some cruel stunt that went too far. Nothing, just soft corporate phrasing about workplace comfort and access reviews, the kind of language that closes doors without ever saying what was behind them. I still work, still use a desk, still own mugs. Life doesn't stop because something got inside it. But I don't leave personal things at work anymore, not even a cheap pen I like. And I don't sit down immediately when I arrive anywhere. I touch the chair first, every time. Not